Hi, tonight we're going to talk about life in the Middle Ages, what it was really like for women and families living day to day in a world of castles, villages, faith, and survival. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it right now where you are? Drop it in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy these calming history walks, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me bring you more journeys like this. Now, let's proceed to the story. The morning begins slowly in a medieval village. A gray light spreads across the fields, carrying the damp chill of the night with it. The sound of roosters rises first, not one but many, each answering the other as if calling out to confirm that yes, the sun is indeed on its way. Smoke begins to curl up from the first cottage chimneys as women stir embers that never truly died overnight. In these early hours, the village is quiet but not still. Life is already moving, softly at first, then stronger with every passing moment. Most people of the Middle Ages lived not in castles or walled towns, but in small, rural communities. The heart of daily existence beat in these villages, where families worked the land, raised animals, and shared the burden of survival. The home was simple, usually built of wattle and daub, with a thatched roof that kept out the rain but sometimes welcomed in small creatures from above. A dirt floor, perhaps covered in reeds or straw, was where children played, where meals were eaten, and where family members slept. Privacy was almost non-existent, for space was precious and warmth was best shared. The first task of the day usually fell to the women of the household. Long before their husbands or sons set out to work in the fields, women rose to rekindle the fire, prepare bread dough, and tend to infants who had stirred restlessly through the night. In the dim light of the hearth, mothers would nurse their babies while listening to the muffled noises outside, the soft thud of a cow shifting in the byre or the bark of a dog, reminding the household that it too was awake. The medieval family relied on routine. Each day followed a rhythm set by the seasons, the sun, and the needs of survival. In spring, the first planting demanded all hands, and children as young as 5 or 6 might scatter seed or scare birds from the fields. In summer, the long days brought unending labor, but also a sense of hope as crops began to grow tall. In autumn, the harvest required entire communities to work together, for food for the winter months depended on their success. And in winter, life slowed, but never stopped, as chores shifted toward mending clothes, repairing tools, and preserving whatever food could be stored. Women and families carried this rhythm on their shoulders. A mother was not only a caregiver, but also a laborer, a manager of resources, and a quiet keeper of tradition. She passed down knowledge about herbs for healing, recipes for stretching small amounts of food, and customs that reminded her children of their place in the community. Her daughters watched closely, learning by imitation rather than formal instruction, for in most villages, education was practical and oral. The morning chores revealed much about the family structure. Bread was the staple food, and its preparation began early. Women ground grain into flour, if no village mill was available, kneading the dough and placing it into a communal oven when possible. Water had to be fetched, often from a well or stream outside the village. This was rarely an easy task, as buckets were heavy and paths muddy, yet water was needed constantly for cooking, washing, and drinking. Girls often took on this responsibility, carrying jugs or buckets with practiced balance while chatting quietly with friends or siblings along the way. Children in the Middle Ages were not shielded from responsibility. From the moment they could walk and speak, they were gradually given tasks to help support the household. A boy might help herd geese or pigs, guiding them with sticks to the edge of the woods to forage. A girl might spin wool, her small fingers working clumsily at first but learning with time. Play and work were rarely separate, for even in their games, children imitated adult duties, building miniature houses from twigs or leading pretend animals with ropes of grass. Fathers and sons often left the cottage early, heading into the fields where oxen needed to be yoked and plows guided. Farming was exhausting and relentless, and the outcome was never guaranteed. Weather could destroy months of effort in a single storm. Yet this work defined medieval life. The food grown was not only for the family but also for the lord who owned the land. Rents were paid in labor and in a portion of the harvest, leaving little margin for personal comfort. Families lived close to hunger, their survival always dependent on both their own efforts and the unpredictability of nature. Still, there were small joys woven into the fabric of daily life. The laughter of children echoed in the lanes. Women gathered at the well to exchange news, and families gathered at night by the fire to tell stories. Religion, too, offered a sense of order. Bells from a nearby church marked time throughout the day, reminding villagers to pause, to pray, and to remember that their labor was part of a larger spiritual world. Faith offered comfort against hardship, and holy days provided rare moments of rest and celebration. Inside the cottage, the space was shared with animals during colder months. A cow, a pig, or several chickens might be kept inside at night for warmth and protection. The mingling of people and animals was normal, though it added to the smells and noises of family life. Straw bedding was replaced as needed, but cleanliness was difficult to maintain. Illnesses spread easily, and families learned to live with a constant awareness of vulnerability. The role of women extended beyond the household walls. They worked in the fields alongside men during planting and harvest. They gathered firewood, herbs, and berries. Some women brewed ale, a common drink in the Middle Ages, since water was not always safe. Brewing was a respected skill and could provide families with extra income. Markets allowed women to sell surplus goods, though most households produced barely enough for themselves. In these small acts of trade and barter, women had a visible presence in the local economy. Life in the village was communal. Families relied on one another, whether borrowing tools, helping repair a roof, or watching over each other's children. Women in particular formed networks of mutual support, helping with childbirth, sharing remedies, or offering comfort in times of grief. In a world where survival was uncertain, this sense of shared responsibility was vital. As the day unfolded, the village grew noisier. The ringing of hammers from a blacksmith's forge echoed down the lanes, mingling with the bleating of sheep and the chatter of women spinning wool together. Children darted between houses, their bare feet quick on the packed earth. Men bent to their work in the fields, while women balanced their roles between domestic tasks and outdoor labor. The village, in its humble and often difficult way, came fully alive. When we imagine the Middle Ages, it is easy to think first of knights, castles, and battles, but the reality for most people was far more ordinary, though no less important. Life revolved around family, work, and community. It was a world of routine, hardship, and small moments of joy. Women and families carried the weight of this existence, ensuring that each generation passed on enough knowledge and resilience to survive the next. The village awakening was more than the start of a single day. It was the beginning of a pattern repeated thousands of times across Europe, in cottages and fields, by countless women, men, and children who lived and died without fame or glory, but whose quiet persistence shaped the medieval world. Their story begins here, with the first light of dawn and the steady rhythm of survival that carried them through the ages. In the Middle Ages, the village was the heartbeat of life for most ordinary people. Men and women alike shared the rhythm of the fields, the seasons, and the community. For women, the village shaped nearly every breath they took. It was both the stage and the boundary of their world. A woman's daily path often traced the same familiar lanes lined with thatched cottages, gardens, chickens scratching in the dirt, and smoke rising from hearth fires. To speak of women in the village is to speak of a world where survival was built upon countless small labors that together kept families alive. Morning began early, often before sunrise. A woman might wake to the sound of a rooster crowing or the bleating of animals in the yard. She had little choice but to rise and set her hands to work. She would stoke the hearth, prepare coarse bread if flour and yeast were at hand, and send children to fetch water from the communal well or nearby stream. Firewood was always needed and had to be gathered constantly, as warmth and cooking depended on it. A woman's body learned to bend, lift, and carry from childhood, so by the time she was a grown wife, she was used to the strain of hauling heavy bundles of sticks or brimming buckets. The village itself was not large. Perhaps 50 to 100 souls lived together in simple dwellings clustered around a church or market square. Women moved among each other constantly, sharing tools, gossip, or small favors. A needle borrowed, an egg traded, or an extra hand to help at birth. The fabric of village life was stitched together by these exchanges, and women were the primary weavers of that fabric. While men worked in the fields, mended fences, or dealt with the Lord's demands, women held the day-to-day pulse of domestic life. They spun wool, mended clothing, tended gardens, and supervised children. The sound of women chatting at the well was as much a mark of village life as the toll of the church bell. Food was never taken for granted. A woman knew how to stretch every grain, every cabbage, every bit of salted fish or smoked pork that might be stored for the winter. In lean seasons, creativity was needed to make unappetizing ingredients edible. Barley bread might be bulked with peas or acorns ground into meal. Herbs gathered from hedgerows could flavor a thin pottage so that children might eat without complaint. Women's skill in the kitchen determined whether families survived harsh winters or times of poor harvest. In this sense, their knowledge of food was equal in importance to the strength of their husbands in the field. Beyond food and hearth, women were healers. Most had some small store of knowledge about herbs, poultices, and simple remedies passed down from mothers or older village women. A sprain might be treated with comfrey leaves, a cough soothed with honey, or a fever cooled with damp cloths steeped in vinegar. The wise woman of the village often held deeper knowledge, sometimes feared and sometimes respected, but every housewife knew enough to tend her family's ills. In a world where physicians were rare and costly, these domestic cures were the front line of health. Festivals and holy days offered respite from labor. On such days, women might join in dancing on the green, weaving flowers into garlands, or attending Mass in their best garments. These were chances to step beyond the drudgery of work, to feel the stir of joy, and to mingle freely with neighbors. Weddings, feasts, and christenings also allowed women to show their skills in preparing food, singing, or guiding rituals. Community celebration was as necessary as bread, for it bound people together and reminded them that life was not only toil, but also shared meaning. Yet life was not easy. Childbirth was a constant risk, and nearly every woman would bury at least one child. Sickness swept through villages without warning, and hunger lurked each winter. Women carried these burdens with quiet endurance. They often outlived their strength, their bodies worn by endless pregnancies and labor. Still they found ways to laugh, to sing while working, and to teach their children. Their resilience kept the village alive across centuries. Education for women was rare. Some might learn their letters if they belonged to wealthier households or if a priest took pity on them, but most peasant women could not read or write. Their wisdom was practical, learned from earth and hearth. Knowledge of planting cycles, the behavior of animals, the turning of seasons, and the customs of the village was their education. It was unwritten but essential knowledge, carried in memory and passed down in practice. A daughter watched her mother knead dough, mend cloth, or soothe a crying baby, and in time she became the same. Marriage shaped a woman's position. A young girl might be promised early, often in her teens, to a man of similar station. Love was rarely the first concern. Families looked for survival and alliances, for fields that needed hands and homes that needed wives. Once married, a woman was bound to her husband's household. Her duties expanded and her identity shifted. She was now known in connection to him. Yet within the home, she held authority, for the running of a household could not be done without her. The church also influenced village women. Priests preached about obedience, chastity, and virtue. Sermons reminded women to serve their husbands and remain pious. Religious festivals, saints' days, and rituals shaped the rhythm of the year. Women prayed, kept holy days, and sought blessings for fertility, health, or protection. Pilgrimages were rare but possible, and relics of saints held special meaning. Faith was both a source of comfort and a framework of control. A woman's life was often measured by her adherence to Christian ideals as taught by the local clergy. Despite constraints, women found small freedoms. They carved out friendships with other women, exchanged secrets, and built networks of trust. These quiet bonds sustained them when husbands were harsh, when crops failed, or when sickness struck. Laughter at the well, shared songs while spinning wool, or whispered stories at night gave them strength. Even within the narrow boundaries of medieval society, women found ways to live fully human lives. As twilight settled over the village, the work of the day slowly quieted. Smoke curled from chimneys, animals were gathered, and children dozed by the fire. A woman might finally rest, her hands raw from labor, but her heart steady in the knowledge that her family was fed and warm for another night. The village slept in the rhythm of seasons, and the women within it held that rhythm steady. To understand the village is to understand medieval women as a whole. Their world was small in distance, but vast in responsibility. They were the keepers of homes, the tenders of fields and families, the healers, the cooks, the teachers, and the singers. Without them, the medieval village could not have survived. Their story is one of quiet endurance, of daily labor unrecorded in chronicles yet written deeply into the survival of Europe itself. Women's lives were not marked by great battles or kings, but by bread baked, children raised, and homes held together. That is the true measure of their role in the village, and it remains one of the most enduring realities of life in the Middle Ages. The day unfolds slowly, and the quiet rhythm of the village settles like a cloak around you. The morning work has already been underway for some time, yet the sounds of effort never arrive all at once. They filter in gradually, so soft and steady that they almost vanish into the air. The low scrape of wooden rakes across the packed earth of a yard. The muted splash of water poured from one clay bucket into another. The even thud of a hand striking linen against a flat stone at the river's edge. Each small sound is not sharp or urgent, but worn smooth by repetition, as if the entire village hums with the same drawn-out note of patience. You walk along the main path, a narrow lane of trodden earth lined with cottages whose walls lean ever so slightly inward. The beams and planks have been shaped not for beauty but for endurance, and yet because of that endurance they carry a quiet beauty of their own. The thatch on the roofs is darkened by years of sun and rain, but the edges are trimmed neatly, and you can see where careful hands have pressed down loose reeds to make sure they hold fast against the coming winds of autumn. At the open doorway of one cottage, a woman kneels with a child beside her, both intent on their work. The child, perhaps 7 years of age, holds a small basket into which the woman carefully places beans freshly shelled from their pods. Her hands move with steady ease, and the child mirrors her motions, though clumsily, sometimes missing a bean and fumbling to pick it back up. There is no hurry. Time, here, is not measured in hours or minutes, but in the slow filling of baskets and the steady piling of goods for storage. A little farther on, an older man stoops beside a low fence. He is mending it with thin branches, weaving them through upright stakes. The branches bend easily, but he handles them with practiced care, tucking one end, pressing another flat, and stepping back to check how it sits. His movements are unhurried, the rhythm guided more by necessity than by any sense of rushing. A few chickens scratch lazily nearby, picking at the dry ground as though the entire scene were a quiet performance meant only for them. The path widens near the communal green where the villagers often gather. Today, a pair of youths carry buckets of water from the well at its edge. The buckets hang from a wooden yoke across their shoulders, swaying gently with each step. Water sloshes, spilling small streams onto the ground, but neither youth seems concerned. They walk carefully, laughing softly, though their laughter is muted, like a sound meant not to break the stillness, but to accompany it. The well itself is sturdy, lined with stone, the rope and bucket smooth from countless hands pulling them up and down. You pause to take in the view of the fields beyond the cottages. The land rolls gently outward, a quilt of earthy tones. Patches of freshly turned soil stretch out beside rows of tall stalks that sway lightly in the breeze. The fields are not endless, but they feel large enough to carry the village's hope. Every furrow, every crop, is the result of weeks of careful tending. Each step a reminder that survival here depends on the patient partnership between soil, weather, and human will. Beyond the fields, a faint line of forest stands like a protective wall, deep and dark, but softened at its edges by sunlight. The villagers gather timber there, and they hunt occasionally, but it is no place to wander lightly. It holds both shelter and danger, a reminder that life here is never entirely secure. Near the edge of the green, a pair of older women sit side by side on low stools. Their hands are busy with spinning, pulling thin strands of wool from small bundles resting in their laps. Their spindles turn, dangling and twirling in steady rhythm. The wool twists into yarn with each careful pull, the thread growing longer as they work. They speak to one another softly, their words nearly lost to the air, as if they speak more to the rhythm of the task than for the meaning itself. As you pass, the scent of baking drifts from one of the cottages nearby. It is a warm, earthy aroma, rich and comforting. Someone has set loaves of coarse bread to bake, and the faint crackle of fire accompanies the smell. The bread will be shared later, perhaps in the evening meal, when families sit together in the soft light of candles or oil lamps. For now, the scent is like a quiet promise of sustenance to come. At the edge of the village, you notice a boy perched on a fence, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He works with deep concentration, his brow furrowed, though his task is simple. The shavings fall one after another into a small pile at his feet. Perhaps he will make a toy, or a simple tool, or perhaps he works only to pass the time, shaping the wood for the satisfaction of it. In such moments, even a small action feels like a thread in the greater weaving of village life. The hours slip by without announcement. The sun climbs, its light softening as it passes through a thin veil of clouds. The air grows warmer, but the breeze carries enough coolness to balance it. Villagers move about steadily, each task blending into the next. A girl gathers herbs from the small garden at the back of her family's cottage. A man leads an ox slowly across the field, the plow cutting into soil that has already been turned many times before. A pair of children chase each other along the path, though even their laughter is subdued, not wild, as though the very air encourages restraint. By midday, the fields hum with quiet industry. Workers move among the crops, bending, pulling, cutting, each action repeated so often that it seems less like labor and more like the natural rhythm of their bodies. A man pauses to wipe his brow with the back of his sleeve, then bends once more to his work. A woman kneels, tying bundles of stalks with strips of twine, stacking them carefully. There is no shouting, no commanding. Each person knows what must be done, and so the work carries itself forward like water flowing in a shallow stream. The village animals add their voices in muted tones. The low moo of a cow echoes from a pen, answered by another farther off. A pair of goats bleat softly, their calls brief and unremarkable, part of the texture of the day. Dogs lie stretched in patches of shade, rising only when someone passes close. They watch with patient eyes, their tails thumping against the earth before they settle once more. At the riverbank, more villagers gather, some washing clothes, others filling jugs and barrels for use at home. The sound of water mingling with human effort is soothing, the swish of cloth dipped into the stream, the soft gurgle of poured water, the hollow tap of wooden vessels set against stones. Children splash nearby, but even their play is modest, restrained, as though they understand that the river is not only for their amusement but a gift that sustains all. Further upstream, the mill wheel turns, its wooden paddles dripping as they rise and fall. The steady creak of its motion echoes faintly across the water. The miller checks the mechanism now and again, adjusting the sluice, ensuring that the grain brought by villagers will be ground evenly. The sound of grinding stones, low and constant, joins the chorus of village life, a reminder that bread begins long before it reaches the table. As afternoon stretches onward, the pace of work shifts subtly. The brightest hours of the sun have passed, and though tasks remain, they are taken with a little less intensity. The fields quiet, the village lanes grow calmer, and families begin to turn their attention to the preparations for the evening. A woman shakes out a blanket at the doorway of her cottage, hanging it across a wooden frame to catch the last of the sun. Another sets a pot near the hearth, adding handfuls of chopped vegetables, herbs, and water, the promise of a shared meal drifting outward as steam. The children, having helped where they could, gather once more at the green. Some bring small toys carved of wood or stitched from scraps of cloth. Others invent games with stones, tossing and catching them in patterns that shift as easily as the breeze. Their voices are still soft, but there's more laughter now, the kind that grows as shadows lengthen. The sun begins to tilt toward evening, painting the village in a warmer hue. Shadows grow longer, stretching across the paths and reaching toward the cottages. The air cools just slightly, and the fields settle, their rustling quieting as though they too prepare for rest. The forest beyond glows faintly at its edges, the dark within deepening, a reminder that night approaches steadily, as it always does. Back at the cottages, smoke rises from chimneys. The smell of cooking thickens in the air, earthy and rich. Families gather, some outside on benches, others inside around tables, each in their own small circle of warmth. Conversations murmur, low and gentle, weaving through the evening like threads binding the day together. Bread is broken, bowls passed, spoons dipped. Children lean sleepily against their parents, Eyes heavy though, the day has not fully ended. As darkness draws close, the villagers light small lamps and candles. Their glow is soft, golden, spilling through open doorways and windows. The village is no brighter than before, but the light feels more deliberate now, carefully kept to hold back the dark. Outside, the stars begin to appear, faint at first, then stronger, scattering across the sky with quiet majesty. The night settles in layers. First comes the hush of animals bedding down, the low shifting of cattle in their pens, the soft rustle of hens on their perches. Then the slowing of human voices, conversations tapering into murmurs, laughter fading into quiet. Finally, the stillness of the land itself, the fields dark, the forest deep, the river whispering softly as it always does. And so, the day ends as it began, not with drama or sudden change, but with the steady flow of time, each hour slipping gently into the next. The village rests, holding within its quiet rhythm the lives of those who tend it, the work of hands that move patiently, the hope that tomorrow will bring the same steady continuity. The night deepens, and the only sound that remains is the soft breath of the earth itself, cradling the village in silence until dawn comes again. Life in the Middle Ages revolved around food as both necessity and symbol. The hearth was the heart of the household, whether in a peasant cottage, a bustling town home, or a castle kitchen. Around its warmth families gathered, stories were shared, and daily sustenance was crafted. Food was never simply food. It was survival, hierarchy, culture, and ritual. The story of medieval life cannot be told without lingering in the kitchen, among the smoke and embers, where hands prepared bread, boiled pottage, and roasted meats on great spits. The kitchen was more than a place of work. It was a stage on which the rhythms of the seasons and the inequalities of class played out, meal after meal. For peasants, meals were often simple and predictable. The diet of a laborer's family relied on bread, barley, rye, oats, and legumes. Bread was the staff of life, baked in village ovens or prepared as flat rounds over a fire. Peasant women rose early, grinding grains on heavy querns, kneading dough with strong forearms, and baking loaves that would sustain their households for the day. Bread was so central that famine or crop failure often translated into hunger not because there was no food at all, but because there was no bread. In contrast, noble households feasted with greater variety. Meat, fish, rich sauces, and imported spices appeared on their tables, though such abundance carried its own risks. Banquets displayed wealth and power, but they also required armies of cooks, servers, and kitchen boys to sustain them. Kitchens and castles were sprawling, smoky places, their walls blackened from years of fire. Cauldrons hung over open flames, and spits turned ceaselessly as servants basted roasting venison, pork, or swan. Peasant cottages offered no such grandeur. A single smoky hearth might double for cooking and heating, with smoke escaping through a hole in the thatched roof or creeping out the doorway. Pottage, a kind of thick stew, was the staple of these homes. Into the cauldron went whatever was available: cabbage, leeks, onions, peas, beans, herbs, sometimes a scrap of meat or fish, often little more than broth and greens. The cauldron might simmer all day, with ingredients added or removed as they became available, feeding the family in shifts. Seasonality governed all food. In spring, tender greens were welcomed after the monotony of stored grains and salted meats. In summer, berries and fresh vegetables appeared. Autumn was a season of harvest and abundance, when granaries were filled and animals were slaughtered for winter stores. Winter, lean and cold, forced families to rely on salted, smoked, or dried provisions. The ability to preserve food was a mark of security. Without it, hunger lurked at the edges of the hearth. Women were the managers of this rhythm. In peasant homes, wives were expected to feed their families daily, no matter how meager the ingredients. Their skill at stretching scraps into meals often meant the difference between sustenance and hunger. In noble homes, women of status did not cook themselves, but they oversaw the household staff, ensuring that meals reflected the dignity of their station. The lady of a manor might inspect the pantry, instruct cooks on feasts, and supervise the serving of meals to her family and guests. Bread carried symbolic as well as nutritional weight. The type of bread eaten revealed status. Nobles preferred fine white loaves made from wheat flour, while peasants subsisted on coarser, darker bread made from rye or barley. Even the color of bread on a table declared hierarchy. The poorest sometimes baked bread bulked out with beans, peas, or acorns during hard times, its flavor bitter, its nourishment limited. Meat, too, marked class distinction. Nobles hunted deer, boar, and game birds, while peasants were often forbidden by law from hunting in the forests. Instead, they raised chickens, pigs, and occasionally sheep, though much of their livestock was reserved for lords or sold at market. The peasant diet included less meat and far more grains and vegetables, though in times of feast, even they might enjoy roasted pork or a goose. Fish played a vital role, especially because of the church's dietary rules. On fast days, which included Fridays, Lent, and numerous holy days, meat was forbidden. Families turned to fish, fresh or salted, as an alternative. Nobles might enjoy pike, sturgeon, or even imported delicacies, while peasants consumed herring, eels, or dried cod. Rivers, ponds, and coastal waters provided essential sustenance, though fishing rights were often controlled by lords. Dairy products, too, were staples. Milk from cows, goats, and sheep was rarely consumed fresh. Instead, it was turned into butter and cheese, which kept longer and provided concentrated nourishment. Peasant families relied on these, while nobles considered soft cheeses a delicacy at their tables. The preparation of food reflected technology and ingenuity. In larger kitchens, great spits were turned by boys or even by dogs harnessed to tread wheels. Cauldrons, kettles, and pots were made of iron, copper, or clay. Knives were universal, but forks were rare, even among the wealthy. Most people ate with their hands, using bread as a trencher or plate. Spoons were common, often carved from wood. Shared bowls emphasized communal eating, reinforcing bonds within families and households. Spices were the jewels of medieval cooking. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, saffron, and cloves arrived from distant lands through long trade routes. Nobles used them lavishly to demonstrate wealth, while peasants flavored food with herbs such as parsley, sage, garlic, and dill. Salt, too, was precious, essential for preservation and taste. Whole economies were built around its production and trade, with salt taxes funding lords and kings. Meals followed patterns of ritual and order. In noble households, dining was a performance of hierarchy. The lord sat at the high table, his family beside him, while retainers and servants ate below. Prayers began and ended the meal, and each course was presented with ceremony. Dishes were served in sequence, accompanied by music, conversation, and sometimes entertainment. For peasants, meals were simpler but still social. Families gathered around the hearth, sharing what they had, telling stories, and reinforcing their unity. Feasts marked special occasions. Weddings, holidays, and the visits of important guests called for lavish spreads. Entire oxen might be roasted, pies stuffed with birds or rabbits, pastries filled with sweetened fruit or almonds. For the poor, festival days offered rare indulgence when communities came together to share food and joy. Scarcity, however, was never far. Crop failure, harsh winters, or war could strip households of food. Famine was a recurring shadow in medieval life. During such times, families resorted to desperate measures, stretching meals with whatever could be foraged: nettles, roots, bark. Malnutrition weakened bodies, making them vulnerable to disease. The ability to withstand hunger was a constant test. Children learned the rhythms of food early. Boys and girls helped gather herbs, grind grains, or fetch water. Young girls observed their mothers in the kitchen, learning the arts of cooking, preservation, and thrift. Boys, too, might assist with hunting, fishing, or tending animals. Through daily participation, they absorbed the skills needed to sustain a family. Food was also medicine. Herbs such as thyme, rosemary, fennel, and mint-flavored meals, but also served healing purposes. Garlic was prized for its health benefits, while honey was both sweetener and remedy. Monastic gardens cultivated herbs with careful attention, blending nourishment and cure. The kitchen was not only practical but symbolic. The hearth embodied warmth, family, and security. In peasant cottages, it was the central feature of the home, around which life revolved. In castles, it became a place of labor and spectacle, where dozens worked to prepare meals that reinforced power. In all cases, the act of sharing food, however simple or elaborate, was a ritual of belonging. As night fell, families often returned to the hearth for the final meal of the day. In cottages, it might be another round of pottage, eaten with coarse bread. In noble halls, it might be lighter fare after a day of feasting. The fire burned low, casting flickering light on faces weary from work or merriment. In its glow, the essence of medieval daily life became clear. Food sustained not only the body but the bonds of family, community, and tradition. Thus, kitchens and hearths tell the story of the Middle Ages in a way few other spaces can. They reveal both the harsh realities of survival and the moments of celebration that lifted spirits. They remind us that behind the walls of castles and cottages alike, daily life depended on the labor of women and men, the cycles of the seasons, and the enduring human need to gather, share, and endure. In the Middle Ages, the weight of work was rarely light. The rhythm of daily life was not measured by a clock on the wall, but by the rise of the sun, the position of shadows, and the turning of the seasons. For women and families, this rhythm was relentless, steady, and deeply tied to survival. Work was not simply labor in exchange for coins, but the very essence of staying alive. It was the weaving of bread from grain, of warmth from wool, of strength from calloused hands, of comfort from community. The burden of work fell heavily on women, though men too bore their share. Fields had to be plowed, seeds scattered, crops tended and harvested. Animals had to be fed, milked, herded, and slaughtered when the time came. Children required constant attention, not in the manner of play or entertainment as we often imagine today, but as fragile lives whose survival depended on vigilance. Every cough or fever could spell danger, and so mothers balanced endless tasks while keeping a watchful eye. It was common for women to rise before dawn. The hearth, long since gone cold from the night, would need rekindling. A few embers from the previous evening might remain, covered carefully with ash to keep them alive until morning. If not, flint and steel were struck again and again until sparks caught, and thin curls of smoke rose into the cool air. Fire was never just warmth. It was life itself, for cooking, for light, for boiling water, for softening wax, for scaring away darkness. Women became keepers of the flame, guardians of its flickering light. Bread was the heart of the medieval diet. It was not a simple thing to prepare. The grain had to be threshed, ground into flour, sifted, and mixed with water and yeast or sourdough starter. In wealthier households, ovens were kept, but in many villages, bread had to be taken to the communal bakehouse. Women carried their dough, carefully marked so that it would not be confused with another family's, and waited as it was baked alongside the loaves of neighbors. Bread was daily work, and bread was survival. A family without bread was a family on the edge of hunger. Alongside bread, women brewed ale. Ale was safer to drink than water, which could be easily contaminated. Brewing was another rhythm that marked the weeks. Barley was soaked, sprouted, dried, mashed, boiled, flavored with herbs or later with hops, and finally left to ferment. It was not the strong drink of modern times, but a mild, nourishing liquid even fed to children. Brewing was so essential that many women earned small incomes selling surplus ale to their neighbors. The image of the alewife stirring her cauldron and offering mugs of frothy drink was a familiar one across medieval Europe. While food was central, clothing demanded constant labor as well. Cloth was not bought in bulk, but made painstakingly by hand. Wool had to be shorn from sheep, washed to remove dirt and grease, carded into soft fibers, and spun on drop spindles or wheels. The thread was then woven on looms into fabric, which was cut and sewn into garments. Linen, made from flax, required its own series of careful steps: pulling, retting in water, breaking, scutching, hackling, spinning, weaving. Women's hands were almost always busy, whether spinning in the corner of a dim room or sewing by the light of a rush candle. Few could afford idleness. Children learned by watching, by imitating, by helping. A little girl might be tasked with keeping geese out of the fields or gathering firewood from the edge of the forest. A boy might carry water from the well or follow his father into the fields to scatter seed. By the age of 7, children were expected to carry a real share of work. Childhood, as we imagine it today, was a brief and often stern stage. Families could rarely afford to indulge. The work of women extended beyond their own households. In villages, neighbors helped one another with larger tasks. Harvest time was the most demanding, when every hand was needed to gather grain before weather spoiled it. Families worked side by side, sharing tools, singing songs to keep rhythm, binding sheaves together under the summer Sunday. At night, weary and sore, they ate simple meals together, thankful for another day's yield. Work created bonds of trust. No family survived alone. Yet the burden was not equal everywhere. Noble families, living in manors or castles, had a different rhythm. Their labor was often managerial. Noble women supervised large households, ensuring that servants, cooks, maids, and stable hands performed their duties. They oversaw food stores, arranged feasts, and sometimes handled accounts. They embroidered fine garments, taught their children manners, and even managed estates when their husbands were away at war or in service to their liege. Their burden was one of responsibility and order rather than physical toil, but it too was heavy. For poor families, there was no division between home and labor. The home was the workplace. Floors might be hard-packed earth, walls smoked from the hearth. Livestock sometimes shared the same roof, divided only by wooden partitions. Chickens scratched near the doorway, pigs snorted in the yard, and the smell of hay mixed with cooking and sweat. Daily life was crowded, noisy, and close. Every task had to be done within this space, and every family member contributed. Illness and accidents were constant threats to this delicate rhythm. A broken limb, a long fever, a poor harvest could throw a family into despair. Women bore particular burdens in this regard, as childbirth was perilous. Mothers often gave birth surrounded by other women, midwives and neighbors, but without the benefit of modern medicine. Many did not survive the ordeal. Families carried grief heavily, yet life pressed on. New children were born, fields needed tending, animals required care. Death was an unwelcome companion, but one never far from the door. Still, within these burdens there were moments of warmth. Families gathered at night around the fire, sharing what little they had. Stories were told, songs were sung. A mother might mend a tunic while humming a lullaby. A father might carve a small wooden toy for his child. Work was endless, but it was not joyless. The bonds of family, though strained, were real and deeply felt. The rhythm of the seasons shaped everything. In spring, fields were plowed and planted. In summer, hay was cut and stored for animals. In autumn, grain and fruit were harvested, salted meats prepared, ale brewed in greater quantities for winter. In winter, work slowed but did not cease. Women spun wool by the fire, men mended tools, children helped grind grain or shell nuts. Winter was a time of storytelling, of reflection, of waiting for the sun to return. The medieval family was both fragile and resilient, fragile in the face of sickness, famine, or war. Resilient in its ability to endure, to keep working, to carry on with the tasks that gave shape to life. Women carried much of this resilience. Their hands fed, clothed, healed, and guided their families through the uncertainty of each day. Without them, survival was impossible. To imagine a medieval family is to imagine motion. A mother bent over kneading dough, a father swinging a scythe, a child running with a bucket of water, an older daughter spinning thread. It is to imagine sound, the crackle of fire, the ring of hammers, the lowing of cattle, the chatter of voices. And it is to imagine weight, not of gold or jewels, but of constant labor, pressing down and yet holding life together. The burden of work was never light, but it gave meaning. It connected families to each other, to their neighbors, to the land beneath their feet, and to the generations that came before and after. In every loaf of bread, in every spun thread, in every harvested sheaf, was the story of survival. Women and families lived this story every day, not as history written in books, but as the quiet, steady truth of their lives. And so the days continued, one into the next, guided by the sun and seasons, weighted with work, lightened by moments of shared warmth, and bound together by the ties of family. The night has worn itself down to a thin and quiet thread. Outside, the desert air has cooled, and the distant sound of a coyote carries across the empty street. The brothel, which only hours ago was filled with laughter, murmurs, footsteps, and the shuffle of boots, has grown hushed. What lingers now is the last low murmur of voices and the soft creak of boards underfoot. The parlor lamps have been turned down, their glow dim, their edges softened as if the building itself has grown drowsy. The piano stands silent, the keys left untouched since earlier in the evening, when a traveling player sat down and played old folk tunes for coins tossed into his hat. The air still carries a trace of whiskey, perfume, and tobacco smoke, but they too seem gentler now, faded like a memory. In the hallway, a woman moves with slow steps, gathering shawls and scarves left carelessly draped over chairs. Each piece of fabric is folded carefully, as though these small things hold more weight at the end of the night than they did when first worn. The routine of tidying, of putting things in order, is as much part of the brothel's rhythm as the laughter of its guests. Every evening holds a shape, a rise and a fall, and this is the soft descent into silence. Doors creak open and close. A few men leave with hats tipped low, their boots echoing briefly on the porch before fading into the stillness of the street. The women who guided them through hours of company now sit together in the side room, hair let down, shoes slipped off, voices low and steady. What was once work has turned into the companionship of those who live the same life, who share the same rooms and the same nights. At the back of the house, in the kitchen, another routine unfolds. A kettle simmers faintly on the stove, water hissing as it brushes against the hot iron. Cups are laid out on the table, mismatched but well used. Some of the women will have tea before bed, others coffee, though it is already late. A plate of bread sits in the center, the last of what was baked that morning. Someone laughs softly, a small, tired sound, as a joke is shared in the quiet. The madam moves through the house with practiced steps, checking that each door is locked, each lamp trimmed, each window closed against the desert chill. She does not need to speak, for the others know what to do, yet her presence is steady, reassuring. It is her hands that smooth the linens, her eyes that make sure no candle burns too close to the drapes. In her way, she keeps the place whole, guiding it through the long years with the same care she gives to every passing night. In one of the upstairs rooms, a woman hums to herself as she brushes her hair in the dim glow of an oil lamp. The sound is not a song meant for others, but a soft rhythm for her own thoughts, a way to carry herself gently into rest. Across the hall, another is already asleep, her arm draped across the pillow, the steady rise and fall of her breath the only sound. The house is filled with these small, private moments, unseen but deeply present. From the street outside, the last rider of the night passes by, the sound of hooves faint and hollow against the hard-packed dirt. The saloon down the road has gone dark, and even the sheriff's office holds no light in its window. The town itself is asleep, and the brothel too folds itself into the same slow stillness. As the lamps are lowered one by one, shadows grow deeper, gathering in the corners of the rooms like blankets being drawn. The house seems to breathe, its walls settling, its stairs sighing, as if the building is tired too. Every mark on the floorboards, every nick on the doorframe is a trace of the countless nights that came before. Yet each one ends the same way, in a hush that feels eternal. Downstairs, the women sit a little longer, cups warm in their hands. They speak of simple things of laundry to be done tomorrow, of new dresses that need mending, of rumors carried from town. They speak not of dreams, for they know life has its way of carrying them along whether they wish it or not. But they speak of small comforts, the things that make each day a little more bearable, and there is quiet laughter again, softer than before. One by one, they rise. A shawl is draped over shoulders, cups are carried to the basin, and footsteps head toward the staircase. The parlor grows empty, the chairs lined neatly, the lamps nearly gone out. The house, once alive with noise, stands in calm. At the very last, the madam lingers in the doorway. She looks out across the empty street, her arms folded lightly, her breath rising in the cold night air. She has seen years of nights like this, and she will see years more, but each time carries its own stillness, its own weight. She closes the door gently, slides the bolt across, and the house is left in peace. Upstairs, the women drift into sleep, their rooms quiet, their windows closed against the world outside. Some dream, some lie awake a little longer, listening to the creak of the boards, the rustle of fabric, the faint sound of the wind through the desert. And then, finally, silence. The brothel has ended its day, as it always does, in a hush that is almost sacred. the lamps burn down to nothing, and the house is wrapped in the soft darkness of rest. Tomorrow will come, and with it the same cycle, but for now there is only stillness, the kind of stillness that carries one gently into sleep. So as you listen now, let that quiet settle over you too. Let the rhythm of this night, the lantern light fading, the voices softening, the house sighing into rest, carry you deeper into your own rest. Drift, the way the town drifts, the way the desert itself seems to drift under the stars. And before you slip away completely, I want to say thank you for joining me on this long, sleepy walk through another forgotten corner of history. If you enjoyed this story, I would be truly grateful if you subscribed, so you can join me again for more nights like this. Now close your eyes, let the stillness take hold, and rest well.